Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're continuing with our shirim on the Leshem Shvei V'Chaloima's Hakdamos U'Sha'arim, and tonight we're going to pick up from Shaar Aleph Parak Beis. Be'ezras Hashem, we'll read inside and we'll go with where the Leshem is taking us, just to be Masber Dinyanim. But it's important, it's the Zach Adar is the yahrzeit of the Leshem Shvei V'Chaloima. I was able to be by the Kever with Rav Moshe Schatz, and he's a tremendous teacher of the Leshem, and someone who's mevared the Leshem very much, so it was a tremendous fuss. But the light of the Leshem, and there's more hiskashus to the Leshem these days more than ever, is because something I was able to say a little bit at the Kever is that the Leshem is a tzaddik who talks about all of history as a preparation for redemption, and then the process that continues after redemption. So it's quite literally a Torah of La'asid Lavo, it's a Torah of the Or HaGanuz, the light that was concealed at the very onset of Maaseh Bereshis, which Adam HaRishon was able to see from one end of the world to the other, from the beginning of creation down to the end of history, Be'ezras Hashem, not in the 7th millennia, not in the 8th millennia, not in the 9th, but the 10th millennia, which the Leshem brings down, as does the Ramchal, which is just when things return back to the infinite, Be'ezras Hashem. So the Leshem is a language, and the type of neshama, and the mechaber, that is mukusher to the entire concept of geula, both the geula that can be found in galus, and the geula that will follow galus. And he's one of the tzaddikim who teach us that even in a state of geula, there will be a concept of galus, not a negative galus, but a recognition that whatever level I'm at right now is in truth a lower level in comparison to an aliyah that I can take in the next moment. So it's a perpetual growth. Mechayel el chayel, like the Kohen Gadol, who would be hoylech with the Urim V'Tumim, with carrying Klal Yisrael on his chest, which is Leshem Shvei V'Chaloma. It's the ability to walk and to carry Klal Yisrael from galus into geula itself, Be'ezras Hashem. And more importantly, the tzaddik should be a melitz yosher for Klal Yisrael and the world, and Metzius, Lagamre. And the whole Torah is a Torah of fixing. The entire thing of Leshem Shvei V'Chaloma is one singular process of fixing. All brokenness is seen in a concept of a process towards fixing. So the light of the Leshem should be a light of perpetual tikkun, Be'ezras Hashem. V'hine kol hagiluyim halalu asher nisgala aleinu b'chol zeh. So we're coming off of where the Leshem was talking about the meanings of the Shame of Ayah, Yud Kei Vav Kei. There was the essential meaning of Yud Kei Vav Kei, which means Hova Tamidis, a perpetual presence, which is beyond past, present, or future, which represents the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is present in all manners of presentness at every moment, without deviation. Then there's the secondary implication of Haya, Hoiva, and Yihya, of past, present, and future, which implies the role of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as a Mehave, not only as the Hova Tamid, of a perpetual presence, but rather someone who is bringing things, someone, Kavyachal, that is bringing things into presence perpetually, and the bringing into presence is only relatable or shaykh when we're talking about past, present, and future. Because if there's no past, present, or future, then there's no place for presence to be Meskala itself. So those are the two expressions of the Shame of Ayah. And then when it comes to Haya V'Hoiva V'Yihya, the secondary explanation of the Shame of Ayah, the Leshem added that it's not expressed as it is written. It's written Yud Kei Vav Kei, but due to its ascendancy and its transcendence and its impossibly high level, to the point where it can't be expressed verbally, so we write it Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which means Adnus, which is the shame of Adnus, which represents Malchus and Hashem's governance in this world. So that's where we're entering into in Parak Beis. Hine kol hagiluyim halalu. All of these revelations, from the highest expression of the Shem Havaya, the Shem Ha'etzem, down to Shem Adnus, Aleph Daled Nun Yud, which is Malchus, the lowest place, all of these Giluyim halalu asher nizgala aleinu b'chol zeh, that Hashem has revealed Himself to us through these revelations. Hinehu rak al yedei shehimtzia es kol hametzias. All of these expressions and levels and modes that we're implying with even the Shem Havaya or Haya Hoiva V'Yihya or the Shem of Adnus, all of these things are only possible or only real or something that we can speak about once HaKadosh Baruch Hu has made existence available, has allowed existence to exist. Shehimtzia es kol hametzias. Meaning to say that none of these things are by nature necessary. The only thing necessary is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, truly necessary. True necessity is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, mechuyev hametzias. Everything else other than HaKadosh Baruch Hu is efshari hametzias, possible existence. Klal Yisrael, Nishmas Yisrael, and the Torah are the things that are closest in Efshari HaMetzias, of possible existence, that are in truth reflective of the absolute true necessity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of Hashem Elokechem Emes. But all of these things are once HaKadosh Baruch Hu has created space. Aval Zulas HaMetzias, but without this Metzias, without the unfolding of existence, Hinehu Pashat Ba'achdus Pshuta Betachlis HaPshitas. When it comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it must be understood that beyond this Metzia, which already means something that can be found outside of something else, HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Pashat is simple, Ba'achdus Pshuta, in a simple unity, Betachlis HaPshitas, in the most simple possible expression of simplicity. Ve'ein lo shum giloi b'shum shem v'toyer klal. And there's no revelation of this aspect of HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chvoidu v'atzmo kavyachol prior to Metzias. There's no expression in a name, or which represents a Shame of Ayah, or a Toar, or like a nickname, which is a secondary appellationary name, which would be Aleph Daled Nun Yud, a non-necessary name. There's no revelation. Ve'ein by shum tvisa klal, and there is absolutely no ability to grasp him whatsoever. B'shum dibur, v'shum mila, v'shem v'mila, v'shum ois v'nakuda. There's no possible way to grasp this expression of God, so to speak, as we understand the concept, with any language, with any naming, with any word, or any letter or dot, meaning any possible form of expression. Ki harei kulam heim b'haira'as gvuli al kol panim. Because in the end of the day, a name and a word and an expression and a letter, or even a point, which is the most irreducible, smallest expression of expression, all of them in the end of the day are relatively limited in relationship to what is truly unlimited. Uba'achdusa hapshuta, and when it comes to the simple unity, and absolutely simple unity of godliness, hinehu meshula mizeh b'tachlis hashlila. HaKadosh Baruch Hu in b'chvaydu v'atzmo kavyachol, in that place prior to Metzias, which is not even chvaydu v'atzmo, it's just the beginning of what we can even talk about not being able to talk about, as we're going to see. But the only language that works there, that is operant there, is the language of negation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is mishulal mizeh. These concepts of space, a name, a word, a dot, they are negated there in the fullest expression of negation.
Is that the same as transcendent?
It's a good question. It's more than transcendent. Transcending is already a language that implies a certain relationship to a space. I can operate in a space and I can transcend that space, or HaKadosh Baruch Hu before Metzias can operate in a space and then transcend that space. Over here, it's the transcendence of transcendence. Even the very concept of transcendence here is transcendent, because we're talking about a concept that has absolutely no relative relationship to anything else. That's this language of prior to Metzias. So transcendence is still too soft of a term to describe it. That make sense? Not sense. I mean, it's not necessarily sensible. V'harihu amisas pshituso ne'elem b'tachlis ha'elem. And the simple, the truthful simplicity that is concealed in the fullest possibility of concealment. V'efshar l'daber u'laharher be'inyan amisaso v'shleimuso asher zulas ha'metzias. And it is impossible to speak or to think about the concept of the essential truthfulness and wholeness or fullness that exists zulas ha'metzias, beyond the metzias. And again, the Leshem, there's a michtav, and we'll go into these michtavim as secondary sources where the Leshem is masbir this inyan very clearly to certain mikubalim in the generation. Rav Naftali Hertz, who wrote the Siddur Hagra, Beniglu Benister, who spent a lot of time learning the Ramchal, and Leshem was a protector of the Arizal, as we spoke about. And he was never going to allow there even to be a semblance of a thought that the words of the Arizal are not essential in their nature and not simply metaphoric that need to be understood and let go of, God forbid. The Leshem was fighting for the belief that the words of the Arizal are as essential as the words of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, which are as essential as the words of Shlomo Melech and Shir Hashirim, which are ultimately as essential as the words of Moshe Rabbeinu. That these words are essential, and therefore we can't come to toss these expressions away as insignificant for the sake of the experience at the core of it, but rather it's a limud haTorah, it's the words themselves. But in these letters, where the Leshem is grappling with certain inyanim in terms of tzimtzum, when the Naftali hurts, and really kind of shalafta neged tzarecha, not the other tzaddikim, but really pushing a point, which is not like the Leshem b'derech klal. The Leshem writes that not only is it Shaar to begin to contemplate what it would mean for HaKadosh Baruch Hu to exist prior to the possibility of existence as we understand it. Not only is language a failure there, the impossibility of language means that it's not that I'm not saying the right word. It's not that I'm not smart enough to say the right word. It means that with all of the language possible to human expression, it's still not even going to be able to possibly reach that place. The Leshem adds that there's also an isser. It's usser. It's usser for a person to come to even believe that they can theoretically begin to contemplate and name that type of relationship with godliness. And the Leshem gives an understanding as to why it's usser. It seems to be contained within an isser of a certain form of kfira, a certain kind of heretical stance, because, and the Leshem doesn't say this, but what does the word understand mean? Understand something means that I stand under it. It means that I have a spatial relationship to it. It's something that is either close to me or far from me, but even the distance from me is still relatively close in terms of my personal experience. But to imply that I can reflect on the infinite itself prior to existence would imply a certain distance necessary for reflection. Reflection, it can't be, a thing can't reflect on itself, other than God who can do anything, Kavyachol. That hu amad v'hu yodeya. That he is the contemplated object and the thing contemplating the contemplated object. Fundamentally so. Fundamentally so. The Leshem has a footnote over here. He's going to say that before the tzimtzum, which is prior to the emergence of the possibility of Metzius, prior to the possibility of a Shame of Ayah, all we have is the Moreh Nevuchim. All we have is the Moreh Nevuchim. After the tzimtzum, all we have is the Arizal. And here we're talking prior to the tzimtzum. But in truth, also, the impulse inherent in the negative theological stance where I come to realize that I can't know anything is the depth and the central point of Chassidus and Panimius HaTorah, which is Tachlis HaYediyah Shel HaNeda. Meaning on the Rambam's cover it says, Mi Moshe ad Moshe lo haya k'Moshe. From Moshe to Moshe there was no one like Moshe. And I wanted to say once that Moshe Rabbeinu taught us the very same thing that the Rambam is teaching us. That Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to see the face of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He wanted to grasp the essence, so to speak, of godliness. And he was told, as Panai lo yirav, you can't see it. The Leshem says, not in this Sefer, but in another Sefer, that we learn this from Moshe to teach us a fundamental tenet of faith. Because if it was anybody but Moshe who was denied access to the fullest grasp of the essence of God, Kavyachol, as if that was even a possibility, then we would have said it's a symptom of their human frailty, their behavior, right? They didn't do enough to reach the highest point of the apex of wisdom. But we learn it from Moshe to teach that this is not a human symptom. This is not a symptom of human experience, rather. This is a fundamental law that is built in to the fabric of creation. It is impossible, this is the language of the Leshem, in Deya, it is impossible in accordance with the laws of creation that the creation can grasp the Creator. It's an ontological impossibility. And it's usher to contemplate that, because to contemplate that means that I'm something other than godliness. And this is what the Rambam was teaching also. In the end of the day, the Rambam is teaching us what we can't know.
How do you understand lo yireni of
The Chai b'yom HaMisa, the Leshem doesn't say it mufurash, but other Talmidim of the Gra speak, or if Menachem Mendelovich Club speaks specifically about Yom HaMisa. And Yom HaMisa doesn't have to mean Misa, God forbid, but the Mekubalim spoke of a yichud called yichud of Mekabtziel, which is something that a tzaddik is supposed to try and do at the moment of, Petira or Aliyah Saneshama, and that happens again. We know from the Zohar Kadosh that death is a relative concept, and as Hashem, no one should have to. They call it Mekabtziel, and it's meant to imply a certain gathering of all human experience that they've had, and then some. And that then some is something that cannot be revealed to a person when they're Odenu B'guf. But it's no, Avadanat. Even this is what the Leshem, even there is never an ultimate. The only ultimate is Choydui Va'atzma, which is never reachable, because the deepest law in reality is Kedushasi L'mala Mikdushasechem. My holiness is above your holiness. Yachol kamoni, you think you could be holy like me? Kedushasi l'malam mikdushaseichem. This is the fundamental point that comes out of every mimer in Chasidus, and this is the fundamental point that comes out of the Torah of the Vilna Gaon. It's everyone is saying a simple thing, emunah, in the end of the day. And that is dependent on the recognition of the impossibility of grasping the essence of godliness. To think is to already be removed from the accessibility to the essence. And it's impossible to speak or to even contemplate. Here the Leshem adds contemplating, right? Before we had naming and words. Here, contemplation itself is an impossibility. With regards to his true truthfulness and true fullness beyond or separate from or without the considerations of existence. It can only negate, it can only be grasped by way of negation. All we can do is refine and refine and refine and refine and abstract and abstract and abstract more and more. Hapshata v'oid hapshata, the concept of the infinite, from every possibility of language or thought grasping it. And we have to consistently garb and ungarb what we conceive of as our grasp to come to the point where we realize that all we can do is negate these concepts. No matter how refined a concept is, no matter how spiritual a person is, they still cannot grasp the infinite in its essence, kavyachol. And again, there's also a secret here that the Leshem is going to explain in the coming chapters, is that there is the Rambam's mahalach of derech shlila, which is the negative theological impulse, so to speak, which is the apophatic element of not being able to grasp godliness, of all language being an attempt to grasp God, but ultimately saying that I can't grasp God, speaking away the possibility of grasping God in any essential way. Again, what is most fundamental is that the laws relating to our ability to think or speak about this element of godliness says absolutely nothing about the ever-present nature of this element of godliness in all spaces and in all things. That's what we refer to as the source of hamakom. It is the space. Everything exists within this unspeakability. So when we talk about the halachas of hasaga, all we're talking about is the human graspability, as opposed to the presence of it. That's not part of the question. And the question of tzimtzum is still a question of speech or accessibility, not a question of whether God's presence is infinitely present. Any opposite notion is an impossibility. But there's also the Rambam's mahalach, and then there's also at the heart of Hasidus, and Leshem is going to say this as well, is that derech shlila is also a form of hasaga. That negative theology or that recognition of what I can't know is not simply a renunciation or a surrender to the impossibility of knowing, but it's a way of knowing. That by not having, I have. And perhaps I have it in an even deeper way than it could have been by way of having it. Because by having something, by grasping something, I'm minimizing it, I'm measuring it, I'm making an idol out of it. By recognizing that I can't have it, but not that I can't because of deserving, but it's an impossibility, so every ounce and gesture to reach that point and to retreat backwards in the acknowledgement that I can't, in that surrender, right, in that rutzah and that shov, we're grasping it at the same time.
Knowing that I'm finite?
Bevadai, and falling into a place of emunah. Knowing that I'm finite, or meaning knowing that the infinite is perpetual. Yeah, knowing that I'm finite is a good way of putting it. That's the derech of from the perspective of mitzidenu, from our perspective. Or knowing that God is infinite in all matters of infinitude, which would be from his perspective. Okay. V'roit Saloimar, what do I mean to say here? Ki hine kol giluyav, hine hem be'erech pshituso asher lamala mehem bebechinas koyach gvuli. What I mean to say is that any possible form of expression or revelation is in relation to the simplicity that precedes it, is going to be considered an aspect of limitation. If I can speak about something and there's a revelation of something, then by definition my relative positioning is now that I am more magushim, I am more manifested or congealed than the simplicity that preceded me. I'm speaking within a structure, exactly. And the ability to speak implies the inability to speak. And the emergence of something implies a place of nothing. And so every revelation, every possible expression, even the Shame of Ayah, as we're going to see, in relation to the simplicity from which it emerged and which is above it, is going to be considered an aspect of limitation. V'hatoar v'hutar l'tayr behem kol teyured shirei kuma. In the place of a limitation or revelation is limitation. Right? If it's revealed, it means that it's concealed. So in a place of revelation, we are given permission, it is mutter, to apply terms, to apply descriptions, bless you. And these descriptions are what are referred to as the Shir Koma. The Shir Koma, the shape of the Godhead, Kaviyachal, the shape of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's presence, right, in this world is a concept that is discussed in all the way back to the Torah HaKadosh, right? We see the eyes of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as the Leshem is going to say. And it's only in the place of revelation that we're able to apply these terms. Like we find in the Torah numerous terms. Kamo v'tachas raglav. Kesuvim be'etzba eloikim. U'kadoy meharbe. U'beprat b'shir ashirim. B'divrei chachmei emes. Again, the Leshem here, like we saw in the Hakdama, he's speaking to the initiate and he's speaking to the novice, right? He's speaking here of an explicit trajectory. He's saying it's true in the Torah, it's true in Shir Hashirim, it's true in the words of the Mekubalim. And the Leshem elsewhere traces the Arizal system. He says we have to take the concepts of the Arizal seriously as we take the concepts in the Zohar, Kadosh from Rashbi, which are a reflection of the terminologies found in Shir Hashirim from Shlomo Melech, which are a reflection of the Torah HaKadosh. So it's not by happenstance that he's using these examples. Hagam she'ikram heim be'emes rak al shem ha'metzias sheyatzim mehem. And even though we can term these concepts, in truth, most of the concepts that we're applying terminology to are really the outgrowths of these concepts as they exist in a space of the limitation that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has given shape to. So meaning to say, when we say the regel of Hashem Kaviyachal, and this is based on the Shlach HaKadosh, which is the fundamental revolution in how we think about God and self, I believe, that generally speaking, when we're talking about Yad Hashem, Ayin Hashem, we're just talking about the Hashkacha, the Inyanim of Hashem's Einayim in this world, which is Hashkacha, and that's what we're referring to. We're still not really referring to the Partsufim or the shapes. That's a language that, the Mekubalim are Shayach to. And so even over here, the role of language is not the absolute capturing of these things, but it's an expression of the outgrowths. Nevertheless, because of the laws of spirituality, we have permission to apply the terminologies that we would have applied to the absolute expressions of godliness to the outgrowths of those expressions as well. Because ultimately what the Leshem is going to show, it's a system. It's a system that stamps itself in an infinite gradational kind of fractalized levels. That what happens at level 10 is happening at level 9, is happening at level 8, is happening at level 7, is happening at level 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's a fractaled system. And it's just a question of the relative positioning of the terms and not the terms themselves. And so here the Leshem is saying that the language that we use can be applied from level to level. And generally speaking, the language we're using is not expressive of the highest levels, it's of the lower levels. But nevertheless, language doesn't reach that level beyond all levels. Those levels that exist above them, even though they're refined to an extent that we can't name them in these terminologies because they're outgrowths that are not emerged yet, nevertheless, because they're the root of it, right? Avos miklal di'ikotodos. Chazal told us this at the beginning of Baba Kama. When we speak of avos, the implication is that there's todos. And so if we see a source, the implication is that we can name the source based on the outgrowth of the source as well. This is not the case, however, when it comes to his truthful simplicity, which is above any possibility of revelation. There it is forbidden in the deepest manner of something being forbidden. In the furthermost point of forbiddenness, to express any name, God forbid, or any concept, shum bechina hamoyre al eza koyach gvuli v'tmuna v'dinyon. When it comes to the infinite expression of godliness prior to the emergence of limitation, it is forbidden in all matters of forbiddenness to imply any terms or apply any terms that imply some sense of limitation, image, or imaginings. because it is mishulal sham mikol zeh b'tachlis hashlila. It is negated at that point from all of these things in the greatest possible expression of negation. V'efshar lehisbainin sham klal, and it is absolutely impossible for an individual to have any type of contemplation there. Ela rak b'derech shlila levad. The derech shlila, the negation, is a way of contemplation. It's not a limiting of contemplation. It's a form of contemplation. It's one that gives birth to bittul as opposed to gaiva, ultimately. Lishlo mesham kol inyan amayra ezechisaron l'shnei masamitas. Our job there is to negate. The only thing we can do there is to negate any concept or musag that implies any deficiency to the wholeness or the true wholeness. V'chol inyan hasaga v'tvisa mezulaso. And to reinforce over and over the impossibility. L'shlo misham kol inyan shal hasaga v'tvisa mezulaso. Any possibility or possible thought of anything other than this thing itself that we're trying to describe of grasping itself. Yeah.
So that's the Torah that should
Sure.
So what is there to do with that access to the reveal?
It's an amazingly delicate question. It's the concept we're talking about is ein soif koydem hatzimtzum. Which.
But how do you access it?
How? Meaning, what's the havamina? What's the havamina? The Leshem is saying it's impossible. What's the havamina? Avodah zarah. Avodah zarah, the natural tendency of human beings to want to be magshim things. The natural things to believe in concepts of godliness that are so structured and congealed that create a mental form of avodah zarah or a natural form of it, or misunderstanding. Shituf, all of them. Bevadai.
But what I'm
yeah. No, avodah zarah would be the avodah zarah is the concept. Well, over here, he's trying to negate the very possibility of accessing something. Forget about the ways of access or thought. Meaning, there may have been a pre-existing concept that there's Mm-hmm. I think ultimately you're right. You're right, but clearly not everybody had that healthy perception. There's a response. Who are those people? Who are what's it in response to? If you look already. So that's a good question. This is the Iker Nakuda, meaning bittul. They're teaching bittul. That's what this concept, the impossibility of grasping the essence of God, is the direct source of the overwhelming significance and really the singular significance of faith. Beyond, it could be rationality, or the belief in gnosis, which was kind of this real belief that the mind can grasp the infinite in some form or graspable way. What power would that offer to the individual? We had various, we had demagogues, we had people who made themselves into God. It's a belief in perfection. We had alchemy, meaning in all forms of expressibility. But the danger of any language, meaning Yiddishkeit, it stands at the forefront of the chasm in ensuring that we refine the concept of God over and over and over and over again through the negative theological impulse at the heart of the Torah itself, to ensure that no one ever come, God forbid, to be magshim or to make tangible the concept of the infinite. I mean, there's immediately one can see it direct. There's always it's not a hidden polemic. There's a polemic. There's a pushback against the notion of the perfectibility of man, of man becoming God, of reality merging into the source of reality, etc. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Exactly. You can't add. Because adding, this is something that Ishbitz, on this Torah, and Ishbitz and Leshem Mamish, they're the same Nakuda Pnimis, I believe. Meaning, the notion of adding more implies any ability to grasp anything at all. The only thing we can grasp is what Chazal have told us we can grasp. All we have is the Matbeya Shemat. Meaning also here the Leshem is Mamish, the Talmud of the Gra. Torah Lishma, the Torah itself. We learn the words not because we grasp them, we learn the words because they're the words that are written. You have applications of grasp, you have, Hapshata and the application and foreign ideas. Beautiful. I love that idea. Do that over and over. But never see the language of the Arizal as a container that needs to be thrown away for some other form of interpretation. Because, and we're going to see this is a return directly to the Zohar, and the Leshem says this and very powerfully, and it's an immediate reflection of Balatanya and Parak Dalid about the Yichud HaNifla of Talmud Torah. But the Leshem says the only thing we can do is learn the words. And when you're learning the words, there's a mechanism that takes place through the kol and the dibor, the utteranceless voice, and the expression through the breaking down of concepts into language and the vocal cords working. All of these tzimtzumim, this somehow, some way, in a way that we don't necessarily understand, is a direct chain that shakes at the highest, loftiest expressions of the infinite reality. That's the chiddush of the Torah. We have the Torah, and by learning the Torah, you're awakening the concepts that are hidden in the Torah itself. Bye-bye.
What is something you can grasp that's revealed to us, but is not correct? Through the Torah, we talk about that.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Yep. Absolutely. It's a groundingness in Chazal. It's a groundingness in the Gilui of Malchus. It's a groundingness in otherwise a person is Kaifer Be'ikr. So let's go weiter. Beautiful. Yeah.
The second factor of Chagiga,
right, in terms of
Ma'aseh Makava.
Yeah.
Think about.
The Muflam and
It's interesting that the Rambam brings his Masbir, those Lashonos, from the Gemara over there, in Pantheism of Zohar. So that could be that the Rambam is saying, he's just saying, his Masbir says, if you try to do these things, you'll cause damage to the world.
Right.
But he doesn't call it Avodah Zarah. But maybe that's where the Leshem is understanding that it's Avodah Zarah in the sense that that's where the Rambam puts it.
Could be. It's a beautiful mahalach. Okay, so let's go weiter. And now the Leshem is saying, okay, now I'm going to really apply this, right? So you may have been thinking, but the Shame of Ayah, right? No. So v'chein gama gilui d'Hashem Havaya Baruch Hu, because we're going to see the Leshem says even the concept of Or Ein Sof is not the fullest expression of godliness. And with these concepts in mind, it's a foolproof system because a person is never falling into the traps of kfir or heresy because you're never talking about God itself, so to speak, or Himself. V'chein gama gilui d'Hashem Havaya Baruch Hu. Hagam she'amarnu shahirasahu al mitziusu amitas shehu behoivet tamidu biltizman. Even though we already told you in the previous parak that there are two ways of understanding the Shame of Ayah. The first way, which is the truest way, which represents His true existence, which is in a perpetual state of presence above and beyond any concept of time, which is the Hoivet Tamid. Hine gam hagilui hazeh neskala aleinu boi gam kein rak al yedei hametzius da'olamos. This expression of the Shame of Ayah, even in its most essential form, is still only revealed to us through the existence of worlds. And here, what worlds? He'elem. The oilem is a he'elem, meaning concealment, symptom. Because any aspect of something that is present, or present in the sense that it's present for me to grasp, or present in the sense that it's present in time, nimtza v'hoveh, something being present means it's accessible, asher b'hiras t'Shem of Ayah Baruch Hu, that is contained within the notion of the Shem of Ayah, hinehu gam kein rak acher shenisgale b'hametzias d'olam kulam. All of this is only once HaKadosh Baruch Hu has revealed Himself in the existence of all of the worlds. Ki koi lashon nimtza, because any language of something that is found, or which is the language of Metzias also. Metzias is found, existence is found. Right? A person finds themselves in the world. Hu moira al gilui b'chiddush v'nizgadish v'nizgal v'nimtza. Meaning implied inherently within the word nimtza, existent or found, is the implication of a new form of a revelation, which implies a secondary, inessential form of revelation, that has been kind of renewed, revealed, and now found. In addition, the notion of existence or something existing also implies something being given over to something that is capable of receiving it. Right? The implication of Metzius implies there is now something that is other than the thing that is revealing itself, that is now capable of receiving that which is being revealed. Similar to the language of Ein Melech Belo Am, that you have no king without an Am. I'm not saying that that's what's being said here, but that's the general framework of the concept. That something present means that it's present to somebody else or something else. Ki kein hu lashen nimsa, because this is another understanding of the word nimsa. Shenimsa lizulaso, it's found to something other. The ikr lashen nimsa, and the essential language of nimsa, or the source of it, hu megzeres yatsa. The implication is that it has already emerged outwards. Sheyatsa meha alamaso, and something emerging implies that there was a previous experience or existence of concealment, because revelation is simply the other side of a previous concealment. So the implication is that it has emerged out of a prior concealment. Which in the end of the day implies that there's something novel here. And if it's novel, then it's not essential, because only the essential is perpetual. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu, b'chvaydo v'atzmo, is something that is mechuyev hametzias. Over here, we're not going to get into those terms. In Chassidus and Tanya, they mean something else. So I want to steer away from those terms.
It's nimsa, it came from somewhere.
It come from somewhere.
Potentiality.
Yeah, it came from previous.
So what about Ayin Yesh?
So we'll get there. I don't want to get off track on this. We'll see exactly, because over here those terms mean something, but they depend every time on what you're discussing. Ayin and Yesh are relative terms. Meaning anything that we don't know or can't conceive is a consideration of ayin. Ki betchila haya ne'elam, in the beginning it was concealed, va'achshav neskala, now it's revealed, v'zehu lashon nimsa, and this is what it means that something is now found or existent. V'harei haya giluyav b'chidush, which means that giluy, that revelation is something that is new, it has emerged at a particular point. Hainu me'es hatzimtzum l'hala. And the point at which all emergence can trace its emergence back to is the point of the emergence of all things, which is the concept of tzimtzum, which we're going to understand. We're not going to translate it here, because the Leshem's theory of tzimtzum is unique and connected really in writing only to Rabbi Nachman, but both of them are at the core of the sugya. Sha'az yatzameha alamaso. At that point in the tzimtzum, HaKadosh Baruch Hu emerged out of his concealment, the bechinas ein sof, that there was an emergence out of the concealment, which was what? Which was the infinitude that preceded existence. V'nasan efshariyus l'giluyav, and it has given the possibility to revelation to unfold. V'chein nezgala achakach b'giluy mamish la'yidei atzilus. And then those stages of potential expression, which are referred to as the olamos de'ein sof, as the worlds of the infinite, this very delicate boundary between worlds that are infinite, which are, as Rav Yitzchak Meir Morgenstern Shlita describes them, a metzias she'ena b'metzias, it's a non-existent existent. And then we have the first world that we really refer to as a real world of one degree or another, is the world of Atzilus. And all of these, again, like the Leshem said, we know there's a world of Adam Kadmon, Atzilus, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, those three gradations, Ak, Atzilus, and Bia. Ak is one thing, Atzilus is one thing, and Bri, Yitzir, Asiya are another thing, ostensibly. Ume'az v'hala, and after the world of Atzilus, hu nisgal v'nimsa shu hoiv v'tamid. And only after, in that place, do we now grasp the concept of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. After the Tzimtzum, do we have this concept that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is now revealed, found in the perpetual presence. V'hu haras the Shame of Ayah. This is the first expression of the Shame of Ayah, the essential one, not the Haya hoiv v'niyeh. We haven't even descended into time. That's what it means. Nimsa kayim kaniskal el b'parak aleph. Amnan, like we said in the first chapter, we said there are two ways to understand the Shame of Ayah. One is Hoiva Tamid, which is in relationship to itself, Kavyachol, and one is Haya Hoiva V'yeh, which is the Mahava, which is the sense of creation in the gradational breakdown of time, which implies a relationship. And here we're also going to see, we saw this idea in the word Nimsa. Nimsa can be something that is present, but also in addition it means Nimsa Lizulaso, like we said. It's also applicable to something else. And here the Leshem is going to go into the second explanation of the Shem Havaya, which is Haya Hoiva V'yeh. Amnan gan hoira as lashon hoiva. But like we said, the language of hoiva, which means presence, humoira gam ken rak al giloy lezulaso. Something presencing itself also implies the revelation of something only towards something other than itself. Ki kol shem v'mila, because any name and any word, hinehu la'olam, it is always perpetual, rak kedei lehishtamesh al yedei zeh lezulaso. The necessity of naming, the need for language, is always for the other, is always in relationship to something other than myself. V'hu masha amru b'mibarabba. Like Chazal have told us, Ani Hashem hu Shemi, I am Hashem and that is my name. Hu Shemi shakarali Adam Arishon. That's the name that Adam Arishon called me. That's the emergence of naming. Hu Shemi shehisnesi beini lebein atzmi. That is the name that I had made a tanai towards between me and myself. Here the Leshem is going to hint very quickly to higher levels of concepts that we're not discussing yet, but they can be applied because it's all just various levels of fractals, right? But here, so there's two expressions in this medrash, and the Leshem also wants us to understand that Chazal meant what they said and said what they meant. But the language of Chazal is also a language that can be understood in the language of Nistaros HaTorah. That hidden within Medrash, hidden and in an open way very often, are the very concepts that we go towards the Mekubalim for as well. So there's Ani Hashem Hu Shemi. Hashem is my name. That's the name that Adam Arishon gave me. But there's also Hu Shemi Shesnesi Beini Lebein Atzmi. It's the name that I had conditioned within myself towards, which implies that that name was a possibility even prior to the need for Adam Arishon. Which, like we saw last week from the Pirkei de Rabbi Elazar, is that Koidem Habriya Hayahu Vishmo Bilvad. That before creation, he and his name existed. What need is there for a name prior to existence? So we're going to see the Leshem is going to hint to that now. Meaning to say, what does it mean that this is my name? Now the Leshem wants us to be careful. Don't think for a second that this name is now separate from what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is. All we have is the Shame of Ayah. This is the name that I have emerged out of my concealment into revelation through. V'niskala atzmuso b'zah Hashem. And the thing that we have no access to, the thing that we can't grasp, the thing that we just spend so much time saying we have no access to whatsoever, that thing is expressed in and through the Shame of Ayah. It's not identifiable with the Shame. I mean, again, we have to be so careful. It's revealed, the atzmus kavyachol that is ungraspable is revealed through the graspable expression of his name, which beckons us right back to the recognition that you can't even say the name. You can't say it as it's written, because the entire name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is to remind us that even the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is simply an expression of the infinitude of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that can't be revealed. And the second statement of Chazal, Umasha Kosev Beini Lebein Atzmi, Hu Giluyev Sheba Atzilus Shenaskala Shame Amisaso Ana Elama Shalamala. Here, this means the Seder of Atzilus that the Leshem that there was a Tanai that these things were going to be revealed. Hu Shemi Shesnesi Lebeini Lebein Briyosai. This is also the name that I made a relationship with in terms of my creations, meaning to say, Roitzalem Shenaskala Al Yado Lezulaso V'hu Ba'olam Hisbiyah. In the worlds of separation. So again, the Leshem is saying over here in this language of the Medrash that what are these different Tanaim? There's the name that I made dependent with myself, and there's the name that I made dependent upon my creations. The name that I made dependent upon myself is the Shame of Ayah of Atzilus, which we're going to see where the revelations of godliness are unified in the most profound type of way. And then the name that I related to my creations with is the world of Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah, which represents the gradational congealment of reality to the degree that it's what we can grasp in what's referred to as Chazal in the Dir B'Tachtonim, in the lowest place imaginable. V'harei what we find, and the Leshem is going to bring us back to the Ikar point, Shekola Gilui D'Shem Havaya. The entire revelation of the name Havaya, Baruch Hu, Hurak Me'ez HaAtzilus L'Hala. It's only what is revealed at the point of Atzilus. And Atzilus is very far from being the tippy-top point of the Seder of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's revelation in this world. V'rak mashin is gala b'elu zulaso. And in addition, it's only what has been revealed to something other. The ayin b'raya mehemna, parshas boy. And so when the Leshem says to look, we technically should look, and all the makoros are brought, but we're not going to do that by learning through the Sefer. It's kedai to look. Masha kasav she'es nesi. So here, this is, let's see what the Leshem says. Masha kasav she'es nesi lashon tanai. And this interesting language of a tanai, a condition, or a pre-consideration towards a condition that will emerge after the decision. A tanai is where, even prior to the emergence of something happening, there was a necessity for that thing to happen. As opposed to something that happens without a prior necessity of a tanai, of making it a condition. Tanai is the osios of esan, which means something firmly planted. Right? So what does it mean, tanai, lashon tanai? Hu b'ma shegazra ritzoni yisbarach lezgala rak b'gilui hazeh dafka. Meaning to say, Hashem reveals Himself in the way that He reveals Himself. Why? Because that's how Hashem decided to reveal Himself. The Leshem has a language in Biurim on Eitz Chaim that any language that we have in the Arizal or all the Mikubalim of Hechrech, of necessity, is all a borrowed term, and none of it is actually necessary. It's only necessary from the Tzimtzum and on, once HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided to make a Tanai that this is how things would be. Which is why the ultimate revelation is Shtaik, Kach Alu B'machshava, as the Leshem says over and over. Kach, Kacha. And so that's the language of Hisnesi. This is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is goyzer within Himself, Kav Yachol, to reveal Himself through. And in not any other way. Meaning the Ramak, the Leshem brings the Ramak, who says that if you begin asking why was it this way, why was it that way, then there's infinite questions to ask like that. It's this way because it's this way. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it. Not above and not below. Meaning this is what we understand from the Arizal and upwards, that the Shame of Ayah Baruch Hu is revealed in the world of Atzilus through all of the Ne'etzalim, from the point of Tzimtzum and below. Avalo mehat Tzimtzum l'mala. But it's not revealed from the Tzimtzum and above. And in terms of the relationship and the revelation to those outside of that fundamental unity which emerge from Him, so to speak, which are the worlds of Bria here. I mean, we'll learn a lot about the distinction of levels between Atzilus and Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, and Leshem. But all of these ways of revelation are the Tanai that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made. And even in the world of Atzilus, it's only in the lower two partsufim of Zer Anpin and Malchus, meaning Klal Yisrael, Torah and Tefillah. And in the worlds of separation, there's no absolute revelation of a HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light in the partsufim above, Zer Anpin and Malchus, in Chachma and Bina and Keser. All of this, all of the rules and regulations are the Tanai that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made to reveal Himself in this way. El Rakba or the Zav and Malchus Bilvad, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals His light only in Zan Malchus there, Shemus, the Havaya V'adnas. Ukenoide, and why is it this way? What does this mean? That the Tanai that HaKadosh Baruch Hu made, and the access point, the truest access point that we have to understanding HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or grasping HaKadosh Baruch Hu, or a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is known as, in Sisrei Torah, as Zer Anpin and Malchus of the world of Atzilus. These two partsufim of Zer Anpin and Malchus and Atzilus. Atzilus is the lowest of the worlds, where the divine light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is still fundamentally identified and unified with every aspect in that world, including the possibility of limitation. And afterwards, we see limitation in the unfolding worlds, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. We see ostensible or apparent limitation emerge in a more congealed way, and there appears to be a fissure between expression, the source of expression, and expression, or infinitude and finite. The access point that we have is the Zer Anpin and the Malchus. That's the Vav Hey of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hanestoros LaHashem Elokeinu, that's Yud K, which we don't have access to in the world of Atzilus. And the Haniglos Lanu Levanenu Ad Olam, the Niglos are the Vav and the Hey, the Torah and Tefillah, the Zachar and the Nekeva. What we tend to say of Kud Shabrichu V'Shchintei, Zer Anpin and Malchus. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way we relate to transcendence, and the way we relate to the immanent expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the two names of those revelations are the Havaya. Shame Havaya, as we know, we're talking about Shame Havaya from, so to speak, of Yachol, its abstract form as the root source of all concepts imaginable. When you talk about the Shame Havaya in Panemius HaTorah, in terms of the sphera that's associated with the name, we're talking about the sphera of Tiferes, which is the part of Zer Anpin, which is the Torah, which is a relatively lower level of expression than higher levels of expression. And we're going to see what the Leshem wants to show us with that. Ukenoide, she'ikra agilei de Shem Havaya Baruch Hu, the fullest expression of the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name, hu nishlam b'Zer Anpin, it finds its fullest expression in Zer Anpin, and that partzuf that's associated with the sphere of Tiferes, the mislabish ba'malchus, and that partzuf, that expression of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, engarbs itself within Malchus. V'sham niskala Hashem Aleph Daled Nun Yud. That's Kudsha B'richu V'shchinte. L'Shem Yichud Kudsha B'richu V'shchinte. V'yatza al yedei zeh b'ha'olam hispiyah. And it emerged through this into the worlds of separation. V'lo himshach gilui of the atzmas or Hashem Havaya Baruch Hu yoyter l'matu shuba'olam habriya. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not reveal the essence of His light or the essence of His name in the worlds below. Again, the Leshem here is coming to make a very clear distinction. Do not come ever to identify worlds of separation with godliness. Identify the perpetual flow of godliness that animates all things, that is inside, outside, surrounding and surrounded, but never come to identify. And this, there's no machlokas whatsoever amongst any tzaddik or mekubal. Ever, God forbid. What Yiddishkeit describes is what's referred to in the Nazir HaKadosh and Kol HaNevuah utilized this term very powerfully, pantheism. What existed prior to this term was something called pantheism. Pan means all, theism, God. Pantheism was the belief, the mistaken belief that all is God, God forbid. And a person can come, God forbid, to be Oived Avodah Zarah and fall into every imaginable place. Pantheism, Lahavdil Alfei Avdalos, is pan, all, is in theism, is in God. Everything is found in God, hamakom. It's not that everything is identifiable with God. And the Leshem is a shomer hayichud here, is perpetually on guard to ensure that we understand that the end point in which godliness is fully revealed and identifiable with its revelation is in the world of Atzilus, in the Torah and in Tefillah, in Zer'an Pen Malchus, Kutshabricha V'Shchinte. Anything below is, yes, a vada when you dig down deep, even 2 layers, you come to find the infinite light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but that's the sharish of Amunah. But the halachos here are with regards to identifying and claiming grasp of it. V'noida she'ikra gilu d'Shem of Ayah Baruch Hu nishlam b'zav v'mislabish v'malchus v'sham niskala b'Shem admas. V'yatza al yedei zeh ba'ilamis. V'lo himshach gilu of the atzmas or Shem of Ayah Baruch Hu yoter l'mata sheba'olam habriya. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu did not reveal the essence of His light below in the worlds of separation. The place where we can still contemplate the essence of godliness, so to speak, where we can claim that the source of revelation and the revelation is the identifiable same thing, that ends at the end of the Malchus Ta'atzilus. That's the Shechina HaKadosha. Shi ha'hei achrei nesha b'shem, which is the lowest hay. That lower hay, the Shekhinah is found in Galus, it animates and it descends into the worlds of separation, but that's not identifiable with godliness. V'miskala b'shem adnas, and that point of Malchus, of Atzilus, which is the last hay, expresses itself in the 4 letters of adnas. V'nitztamstem u'matzayim atzmas alikus b'seifa Malchus Ta'atzilus. And the fullest expression of the essence of godliness, which means that the revelation is identifiable with the source that is revealing it, where the Oiris and the Kalim are one and the same, that ends in Atzilus. To say that or claim that in worlds of separation is Avodah Zarah Gemura, Chas v'Shalom. Umisham l'matahim nivraim noitzrim v'nasim. And below, anywhere below Malchus of Atzilus, there are things that are created, are formed, and are made. She'enam elukas klal. That are not identifiable with godliness whatsoever. I mean, identifiable in the sense that they can be grasped as godliness. Again, we said this is halachos in grasp. These are halachos in terms of the Gavra's ability to chap HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In terms of the chefza, underneath everything, enon mavado kepshuta mamish. Like we said, the inability to grasp the essence of godliness does not for one iota of a second imply any possibility of anything existing outside of that absolute space of godliness. So we're not talking about negating God, God forbid, from the places of separation. It's all a question of hasaga. How am I allowed to be masagit? At that point, everything is revealed only by way of masks, of separations, of partitions. And all that emerges out of them is simply one tamsitz, a quintessence. But as Leshem is going to, he speaks and unspeaks all the time, because here we're saying all we have is the limit point of Malchus of Atzilus, and below that there's no essential expression of godliness. But what the Leshem is also going to stress over and over is that the quintessential drop that comes down through that mesach contains everything. It's a fractal. It has everything in it. And if you dig down deep enough, you find in every prat the entirety of the klal. But you have to speak. In Pnimius HaTorah, as in Niglos HaTorah, a person has to speak with Trei HaFachim B'nai Se'echad, the oppositional unity of things giving strength to themselves in their opposition. Ubazeh, and through this vara v'yatzer v'asa kol metzias debiyah, and through this gradations of tzimtzum and revelation and concealment, this is how the existence of the worlds of separation came into existence. Kemoishe mevur b'seder atzilus b'kitzer parak aleph b'drushay abiyah parak yud gimel b'seder abiyah seif. Meaning here, all these terms, this is what a person sees when they learn Nefesh HaChaim. Right, Nefesh HaChaim is this. Nefesh HaChaim is the Rav Chaim Volozhiner saying what is and then showing the receipts for it, Kaviyachon, and saying, I know this because I have 1,000 sources in Kitzvei Arizal to show. V'zeu shamar amru dehisnesi. This is when Chazal say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, this is my name that Adam Arishon called me, and this is the name that I made a condition with, that it's a language of a Tanai. I skipped the line where Leshem says, Kanoida kol zeh l'chot toameh taim eitz chayim. That's how he refers to people who learn the Arizal, those who taste from the tree of life. This is how HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to fear the Welt. This is how Hashem wanted to reveal Himself. This is what we have permission to do. We have permission to serve Hashem in this way. That's the Tanai HaKadosh Baruch Hu made. To end on this Nakuda, Nefesh HaChaim says in Shaar Gimel, what's the problem with coming to contemplate Einon Mavado and Yichud Ilah, that higher perspective of Hashem being everywhere and surrounding and fulfilling everything, is that you'll come to misjudge the limitation, you'll come to worship God in Mekomos HaMetunafos, which we know is a Davar Asar. And the Rav Reuben edition, the earlier edition of Nefesh HaChaim, Rav Reuben was the Tal Le'oros, who was Nifter. He was a young, tremendous Talmud Chacham. He put out a Sorim called Oros Hagroa, 2 volumes, which are just Niflaim v'Niflaim. And he writes there to look at the Michtav Me'Eliyahu. And if you look at Rav Dessler over there, he says, and what's the problem with worshiping HaKadosh Baruch Hu in a bathroom, in a Makom Metunach? It's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not found in Makomos Metunach. It's that, and I heard this in the name of Rav Blachman, Shlita, he said that there's a chalus isser of hasagas alukus in these places. It's not that there's an actual absence of godliness. There's no real halal. Lo yisa halal b'shem kadshi. Everybody agrees. These are rules in halacha of graspability, and Be'ezras Hashem, we'll continue with Parak Gimel next week. Okay, Yeshua Koyach.